Good morning and welcome to Web3 Wednesdays, where we chat through some of the complex and nuanced topics in crypto so that you can stay ahead of the curve. So today I'm joined by Matthew Morris. He's the Director of Sales over at Machinations, which is a game economy modeling and monitoring toolset that enables developers to calibrate their assumptions and make well-informed game time decisions around balancing certain mechanics. So Machinations itself has been receiving an increasingly large amount of attention as the Web3 gaming conversation turns to sustainability. And we've been delighted to have been working with them for a number of months on a number of different initiatives here, and Matthew's experience on the front lines of theorizing around user-owned economies and the subsequent economic mayhem that goes hand in hand with that make him a brilliant resource for exploring the advantages of the Machinations system and our broader partnership with them over the Kapital DAO's Web3 gaming asset management platform. So, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Fantastic to be here, Sam. Thank you very much for the invite. Been really looking forward to catching up with you and going through this with you today.
Well, we are stoked. Every time I see this, and we joke, you and I all the time that this looks just like Factorio, but I'm excited to show the viewers just how much like playing a game this really is. So, Machinations, obviously itself, you guys are a relatively new entrant, right? Like you've been around for a while, but on the Web3 space, you guys are really starting to make a splash. So can you explain to the viewers, what all do you guys tackle and how do you help, to kind of raise the bar on these games that we're all playing?
Absolutely. Well, as you say, Machinations has actually been around for almost 10 years. It was created by Dr. George Dormand during his PhD studies. He got really frustrated with trying to understand progression and trying to understand emergence in games, which is the chaos that happens with all the random things that can happen inside a game. So chess, as an example, there are more combinations of chess moves than there are stars in the entire universe. So it's incredibly complex. And trying to understand that in something like a spreadsheet is just a fool's errand. You're never going to really understand what could happen in a game. Jump into a Web3 game economy, and suddenly you have an incredibly complex economy that you're trying to understand how it could progress and how players could interact with it. And that's where Machinations comes in, because we can start to build up data before the game's even launched on what's going to happen with the economy.
And that's just such a powerful thing to state, because as we've all recognized over the past year, Web3 game economies have been hilariously volatile, right? I mean, some clearly have not been modeled at all. Some were modeled maybe too optimistically. It's a mix, right? And so I think a tooling set like this is just so powerful in that context. So can you actually show us the set? Can you show us what all Machinations can do, and what we should be expecting here?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me kind of show you the platform. So this is Machinations. It's a browser-based platform. Very quickly, we can drag objects from the left-hand side here. These objects actually make up a Turing-complete language. One of the key parts of Machinations is actually that within a few seconds, we can start to build out different types of systems that allow us to test something. So let's have a look at something really simple. Let's call this heads, and let's call this tails, and we're just going to simulate your Machinations flipping a coin. Now, obviously there's equal odds of us getting heads or tails, but when we hit play on this, this is now using Monte Carlo statistical analysis. Sounds really complex, but basically what it means is, rather than saying, well, if you were to flip a coin 10 times in a row, you're going to get 5 heads, 5 tails. Actually, Monte Carlo is going to treat each individual resource that comes through this gate as its own odds. So it's going to give us results that are simulating real-world behaviors. So you can see I've got slightly more heads than tails, so heads are currently winning. And I can run this 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. And eventually, after that many plays, it would give me the exact odds of getting heads or tails. And that's a really simple example of something that it's important to understand when you're building out a game. You might say that something's got a 10, 20% drop rate. What does that really mean? And what does that really mean for the player as they're progressing? Now, as we can see here, heads are winning by a long way. That's important to be able to understand how these statistics and how these things can impact your gameplay.
Yeah, because I mean, here you end up with an edge state, right? I mean, it's easy to see how with a heads or tails scenario, something like this should be pretty easy. But as soon as you add this to an actual game economy and you're computing hundreds of different drops and where they end up in the economy, that is super important.
Yeah, and let's look into that a little bit more. So let's just talk about the challenge then that players are facing as they kind of go through this system, as they start to understand how complex some of these economies can get. Now, right the way down at the core of almost every game, we've got this very simplified game loop. And here we have the player, they play some game, they do an action inside the game, they're going to earn a reward, and then they're going to take that reward and they're going to reinvest it back into the game to progress or level up in some way. That could be in the form of unlocking an awesome new sword, leveling up their character, or maybe it's a simple puzzle game, and that level up progression just means unlocking the next level. Now, when it comes to Web3 games, we're now introducing a new path. This path is where we can then start to actually take some of those rewards rather than always reinvesting them back into the game. We can now sell these out through the blockchain and exchange them for other items, or maybe even cash out of the game. Now, where it starts to get confusing is there's not just one of these going on simultaneously. We actually have a huge number of these progression systems happening in parallel all the time, with different players experiencing the game in different ways, logging in different amounts, focusing on different areas of the gameplay. And back in Web 2, all of these progression systems were isolated and they were independent. So if you and I were playing Apex Legends, Sam, and you had an awesome game and I had a bad game and you unlocked an awesome new skin, that wouldn't impact my progression at all. That's still your individual progression system. But now in the world of Web3, all these systems are linked together through the marketplaces and through the token exchanges. Players aren't just selling items, they're also purchasing items in the form of NFTs. They're purchasing tokens to the use and utility inside the game. And ultimately, all of these systems are then linked to the blockchain. So any kind of volatility in the blockchain market, Ethereum prices going up or down, now suddenly these are impacting our game economies.
And yeah, and that's an open paradigm that old Web 2 designers did not have to deal with in any capacity, right? So this is a completely new way of having to think around these game economies, and it really necessitates a completely new design for each one of these.
Absolutely. And then, to your point, game designers in Web 2, they were the gods of their universes. They had complete control. They could dictate every single thing. But now in the world of Web 3, some of that control is given out to players through governance and through different voting mechanics, but also there's these external factors that can now impact our games in all sorts of different ways. And this is where Machinations comes in as the leading platform to help you visualize and understand these economies and really be able to get to grips with what's going on with that emergence and with those types of systems.
I love that. And, you know, chatting through, you know, some of these different types of systems, which ones stand out to you? What, what's most interesting to you to model here?
So one of the key things that we're always looking for is how can the game designers have control over the sources? So things that are going to add to the economy and also the drain. So anything that's going to be taking either NFTs or tokens out of the economy, and what are the different levers that we have in place that can impact these. Now, this is an example that we built a little while ago of a kind of a single player model and a single player's experience as they go through and experience the gameplay. In here, we've got a number of different systems and different mechanics, but ultimately what we're looking to do is to understand what's the experience that one player is going to have in their progression system and in their economy. More importantly, what are they going to be doing in terms of buying or selling any tokens or NFTs that they receive? Within a few seconds, we can then start to build up data using this to look at how many tokens has this player or this player persona interacted with the economy? How many tokens have they bought and sold?
Very cool. So, and I mean, even just like as a high level comment here, do you guys see on average how many tokens players sell? I assume that's really tied to their personas, right? But, you know, like, is there like an average amount that people do cash out of these games?
Well, it really all depends on the kind of the game mechanics that are in place. Every game is its own unique snowflake with its own mechanics and its own economy. So every time there's going to be different reasons that players will interact with a token. And that's one of the key steps we look to understand before a game's even launched is what sort of personas is this game tailored for? How are they going to interact with the economy? And what's it going to what's going to mean if the mechanics encourage them to spend those tokens on in-game items, or if they have an excess tokens, what are they going to do to sell them? And overall, what's the impact going to be? Now, when we talk about personas, one of the key personas that we always look at, and are super relevant for today's talk, is a worker-style persona. So these could be scholars or those sorts of users. Typically, they log into a game each day. They'll generate as much as they can in the gameplay, and then really look to cash out as quickly as they can and sell those tokens. So in here, this red line is tracking how many tokens that player is accumulating each month, and then how many they're going to be selling each month. And we can see here that it varies throughout the 2 years of gameplay that I've just simulated, and we can really understand, what's the potential rewards that these player personas are going to be receiving. Now that's great. Once we've done that, we then want to adjust our persona, and then let's have a look at a player persona. So someone who's going to be wanting to experience the gameplay, they want to go through long-term progression. Maybe the economy and the revenue opportunity is secondary to them going through and experiencing the gameplay. So they're going to have a very different set of criteria. They're not going to sell as many tokens because they probably want to use those tokens inside the game. But again, we'll put another 5 players through 2 years of gameplay. Now, ideally, when we're doing this in production, we don't just simulate 5 players and build our data. We simulate a couple of thousand players or even hundreds of thousands of players going through this type of system to really build up statistically relevant data. And I love talking about statistics, but it's all about just running. You can't just run one simulation. May as well just have one spreadsheet. It's all about doing a huge number of simulations so that you can really understand how those edge cases could operate. And
I love that.
Monte Carlo to really understand what's the potential outcomes that players could have. We can get averages from this, but also we can start to understand what are those edge cases. Is there something a player could do inside our game that could go and pull the economy too far in one direction?
And importantly, I understand you guys can do this obviously both pre-launch, but you can also do this during the game with live data running, right?
Absolutely. So once we go through and we do this prior to launch, it's very, very helpful because we can spot any potential issues with the economy before a game's even launched. But once we start getting live data, we ingest that back into Machinations. We rerun these simulations. We validate all of those assumptions. Like, were we crazy? Were we right? What's actually going to be the outcome of these things once we get into it? And then once we've been through that sort of process, we can then start looking forward 12 to 18 months into the future to understand where the economy is going to go. And that leads me into a perfect segue. Thank you, Sam. And we'll jump into the next model. So this is where we can then really start looking into the future to understand how an economy could operate. In this model, as well as simulating all of the kind of the core gameplay mechanics and the different personas, we're also simulating the automated market makers and liquidity pools. This gives us the opportunity to look at all of those supply and demand metrics that we've created for each of our tokens and our NFTs. What does this actually mean to the token values? This way, we can actually look into the future to see how the gameplay mechanics can influence our token values into the future. This becomes super powerful, and I'll give you a quick example of the sorts of things we can do here. So first up, we're going to run our simulation to look at one set of statistics based on our gameplay mechanics. This purple line is tracking some historical values of Ethereum. This black line is then tracing how much one of those worker-style scholar personas could make per day inside the game. Now, it starts off super healthy at kind of $4.50, $5, spikes really nicely to $15, $16, but because we're creating too many tokens, we're causing inflation, and actually our token values are then dropping so that in a year or so's time, they're only going to be making 30 cents a day.
That is so cool. I'd love to see that, Matthew. I mean, and right here, guys, just so that you're very clear, this effectively is one of those CoinGecko price charts out in the future, right? So like based on this diagram and this price movement, you might expect that this type of behavior is realistic. And that's crazy. That is so powerful to be able to predict like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the real where it gets super powerful is then using machinations. We can then play about with these variables. We can adjust how the gameplay mechanics operate and see what the results are against the token values. So I've just made a quick change. I've created some constraint in our forecast. So we're not going to give the players as many tokens each time. But actually, that's going to drive up the token price a lot more. So because of that extra constraint, we're now going to climb. We're going to have a spike at about $18. But more importantly, we've got a much higher token value long into the future. So we're creating sustainability inside our economy. And this is where it's all about getting proactive with economy management. It's not about waiting until you see something going wrong with your economy and then thinking, oh, let's make some changes. Now it's all gone horribly wrong. Let's get proactive with this. This is real players, real money. We can't gamble with their money. So let's make sure we're doing it right. And let's get proactive and make sure that we're making small tested changes to maintain sustainability of our economy and avoiding that whole boom bust cycle that so many projects go through.
I love that. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned earlier, Web 2 game devs effectively God, right? Like everything they say goes. Web 3 game devs really more like the government or the Federal Reserve or something, like trying to decide monetary policy and hoping that everything pans out okay. And there is, I would hope that once we get to that side of the equation, people are using models, right? Like you're not just guessing, you're actually really trying to think these things through. And it's a great topic, in the broader Web 3 gaming ecosystem because a lot of people have mixed feelings on, the role of organizational gaming, right? So like these really big guilds who come in, and people claim nowadays that guilds are purely extractionary in nature, right? That guilds come in and they deploy into games and they wipe out the game economy and drain it of all value. And to me personally, it's actually a very short-sighted take because it for some reason assumes that having a large active player base is wrong. And like, you shouldn't want that. And it's insane. It's like, you can't blame the players for optimizing in the game. And so to me, it really falls back on the game devs, right? So like, it's your job to ensure that your economy, your government, your nation, whatever it is, however you want to call it, that is balanced and you are ready for the onslaught of players that will play your hopefully fun and engaging game. So it's it's an interesting take, and it's an interesting environment right now that I hope as we drive towards more sustainable games, that you're actually going to end up with that narrative flipping a little bit. You're actually going to see people say like, okay, yeah, like organized Web3 gaming, this is a plus again, right? Like I want guilds in my game because I want these thousands and thousands of players and this huge amount of capital to be directly injected. And so that's kind of where I see it going, in the near term. From your perspective, do you see it similarly? How, are you seeing that play out from where you sit?
Yeah, well, I think one of the key things you should think about every single economy, whether it's a Web3 game economy or actually a government country economy, the number one requirement for any type of successful economy is a happy community inside that economy. If we're not happy with our taxes, we go and vote for a new government. If all of the economic crises that happen in the world, they impact our community and they impact what we're doing. And if you don't have anybody in your community, you're not going to have a successful community. Full stop.
100%.
Obviously, with games, the number one thing that's going to drive that successful economy is fun. And players should be coming in because they want to have fun and enjoy the gameplay. But really, to your point, these guilds can have a huge impact on how successful your community can be. They tend to be extremely passionate about games. They tend to be exceedingly passionate about getting into the gameplay and doing the very best they can inside the game. And ultimately, that's what we want for all of our games, is to have a community of happy, engaged players.
Yeah, you couldn't ask for anything better, obviously. Like a lot of these guilds, they do operate on, the pretense that there will be some monetary gain for the players, but that doesn't mean that the players are like just there to earn the cash. A lot of them really get into it. We still have hundreds of people playing, some of the big games even after they've crashed. And it's just because they love the game, they love the community, and that's just part of the social fabric.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the key things, especially with any type of multiplayer game, one of the biggest challenges that all multiplayer games face is getting enough people to actually play the game so that anybody coming into the game can actually get a match.
Yeah.
If you've got a 1v1 game, that's fine. You might be able to find a match quite quickly, even in a fairly small player base. But if you've got a game with any more players inside it, you don't want to have players having to wait 10, 15, 20 minutes to try and find a match, because the second that happens, they're going to get bored, disconnected, and go elsewhere. Having a great guild come in that's going to actively be playing your game can have a huge impact.
Oh yeah, and again, just to contrast with the Web 2 approach, right? Like there is really no equivalent perfectly to a Web 3 gaming guild in Web 2. You have esports organizations, but they don't have 50,000 players who are just going to like dump in all of a sudden. So it really in the future, I do see it as being a closer collaboration between the game developers and the guilds, and not so much kind of what the Twitter spaces are angling it right now, where it's like this antagonistic relationship where it's just extracting. So no, that's awesome to get your take on. And it's fun to noodle around this idea of sustainable game economies and where those are really going. And I know that Machinations itself, you guys are taking steps to kind of further that with your the verified by Machinations audit process, right? And it's something that us over at the Kapital DAO are super big fans of, because we think it's really important that you guys are taking the steps to offer a service like that, to basically tell the community, like, yes, like this game, at least from a modeling perspective, looks like it's going to work. It's not going to go straight up and straight down. And so, from our perspective, we're interested, obviously, in making sure that games that are flagged as, at least safer, right? Like they have been audited at least, that we get those onboarded immediately, because guilds are constantly clamoring for games like that are carefully well crafted and really thought through, to actually deploy these millions of dollars of capital and thousands of players into. So, I'm curious to get your take on that, like the entire verified by Machinations badge, the audit process in general, your guys thinking on that bit and where it's going.
Yeah, it's really exciting times for us. We launched the Verified by Machinations program earlier on this year. We've had a huge amount of interest in it, and it's all about making sure that games have got the potential to be sustainable, and that their economic design has been through this type of process, and we're able to run hundreds and thousands of simulations to really make sure that it's got the controls in place and it's got the potential to be sustainable. And there's lots that goes into that process, and we haven't got time to go through all of it today, but really it's about testing it to see where those control points are and running it against a number of different scenarios that could happen in the world. I often think of that Boston Scientific, where they've got those robot dogs, and you see people kicking them, pushing them to see if they'll fall over and see if they stagger. Well, that's kind of the process we go through with a game economy, where we build out simulations so that we can test it, then we poke it and we see what we can do to see if we can cause the economy to fail. Now, that can be based on a number of things. One of the key things we've been looking at the moment is there an element of the economy that's dependent on new player growth? Now, new player growth is great. It can drive the economy. It brings in new players, attracts more players. That's fantastic. But if the new players stop coming into the game, or some players start to wander off and play a new title because they want to try out something new, is that going to destroy the economy, or is the economy still going to be potential even in those sorts of scenarios? And that's really one of the key things to look out for. Any type of scenario where it's purely dependent on new player growth. And if that's the case, it's going to fail the audit, and we're going to reiterate on it and help that team make sure that they can introduce mechanics that provide that long-term sustainability of their economy.
Yeah, and I mean, as both a guild operator and a player myself, I love to hear that, because, I get really passionate about games that have a very small player base sometimes. And if you told me that the only way that game survives is if I go get my 5 friends to join and buy my bags, I'm out. I can't play. I love the game, but I can't do this.
Yeah. Well, and also, there's only a finite people on the planet. If the game economy is purely dependent on new player growth, eventually it's going to run out of people that can play the game, or that are interested in playing the game. That might be the most successful game ever and have 7 billion people on the planet playing it. But at that point, it's going to run out of players and it's going to have a big crash.
That's a hilarious thought experiment to consider. Everyone in the world playing the world's best game, and it still fails because you did not properly model the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And all about being able to test those different assumptions, make sure that we've got them right, and be able to monitor the game continuously. So our audit process isn't a one-off event. We go through, we help plan the preparation of the launch. Once that game's launched, we pull that data from the game analytics, from the blockchain, we ingest that, put that back into the Machinations model, and we constantly reforecast so that we can spot potential problems before they get out of hand.
I absolutely love that. And yeah, like I said, we are totally stoked to be, fast tracking the games that you audit onto our platform so that we can get guilds managing assets in those environments ASAP. Because in our opinion, those are the ones that will, really, really, really steal the show over the next 2 years.
Yeah, we've got some amazing projects that we're working with, really excited about them. We've got some that are literally going live right now, and brilliant to see the data flooding in and seeing how they're doing and how the impact of our simulations have kind of helped steer them in the right direction for success.
I love it.
I love some of the teams that are going through it. We've run some simulations and they've gone, it's not going to pass this way. We're going to have to go back and revisit it. And, being able to do that for them in a nice, safe environment without risking their players' wallets and their players' funds is an absolute pleasure. And it's fantastic to see the impact we're having.
It's a huge value add, and it's going to become increasingly important, obviously, as more of the game, more of the world, comes online and kind of joins the digital era, and Web3 gaming continues to, kind of on its explosive growth trajectory here. So, Matthew, we're stoked to have you on here today. Really glad we got to show the viewers some of this stuff here. Do you have any final comments that you want to wrap up here? Is there anything that you'd like folks to, take home and really consider and noodle around here on Web3 game economies?
I think just that there's a couple of key fundamentals. Money's only worth something because we trust it and we have faith in it. And that's the same with our player communities. It's all about building trust, building that relationship with your player community, earning that trust and then keeping it. And ultimately, that's all about fun. Let's give these players a fantastic experience so that they enjoy coming in and they enjoy interacting with our games. One of the key things I would say is think about amazing gameplay first, and then think about how to add blockchain technology to enhance it. Don't think DeFi protocol and how we can gamify it. Players first, let's make some really fun experiences.
I love that. A gamer first approach. Guys, if you have not already checked out machinations.io, you can certainly go over there. I believe there's even some free demo or community accounts. You can even play around and pretend you're playing Factorio with some game economies yourself. So Matthew, great to have you around, man. And we'll see you guys soon, okay?
Fantastic. Pleasure to be here, Sam. You're one of our great thought leaders in this new empire of Web3 games. So it's a pleasure chatting to you today. Thank you.
Oh, very flattering. Appreciate it. See ya.